Hello, my name is Jay Loomis. I'm working on my PhD at Brown University in the music department, and I'm really happy to be here today talking to you about how I use 3D printing in my research and work on making musical instruments, specifically wind instruments. I want to say thank you to Annalisa and the team at Formlabs for inviting me. It's an honor to be here. So, this first slide is a bit about the materials that I use for making flutes. And my research at Brown in the music department is focused in two specific areas regarding flute making. But before I get to that, I want to talk to you a little bit about my trajectory making instruments. I've been making instruments for about 15 years, and I use a lot of different materials here. Up in the middle, you can see this is wood. It's called Japanese knotweed, and I use that to make Native American flutes. Right here, you can see clay that I use to make ocarinas, and also different types of flutes. Here are the molds that I 3D printed using extrusion 3D printers, and most recently, I'm really happy to be using the Form 3 with different types of resins. Here you have the draft resin, which I love because it prints very quickly and actually works quite well for making flutes. And this is a recent material that I'm exploring, which is the flexible 80A, and that's a pan flute that I printed a week or so ago. On this slide, and throughout this presentation, you're going to see a lot of images of flutes in different stages of construction. I don't have time actually to talk about every image, but if you have any questions, please feel free to send me an email or find me in the Q&A, and I can give you more information about these. For this slide, I just want to focus on this image over here. One of the most important parts of making flutes is being able to stick tubes together and make sure they have a very tight seal, an airtight seal. And usually flute makers or clarinet makers or other instrument makers who work with wind instruments, they would use cork for these, but you need a lot of tools, and cork is not an easy material to work with. So it's been great to be able to use flexible and elastic resins from Formlabs to experiment with making gaskets and seals so that I can connect the tubes together effectively. This is an Irish flute right here in the middle, made of African blackwood, which you can see has been the inspiration for these explorations in gaskets and sealing materials. Here I'm using a tough 1500, and which is great because it stretches and flexes even if the fit is not perfect. You can see with the draft resin here, I pushed it too far and it cracked, but no big deal. So that's one of the ways it's been really helpful to have the Fusion 360 software, for example, is what I use to create the dimensions. I can easily in the software change the dimensions and reprint this piece out so that it would fit just perfectly. So on the next slide, I just wanted to show you three instruments that I'm really proud of and fascinated. I decided I wanted to try to make an instrument that is not anything like the typical materials that I would use, clay or wood or even hard plastics. I wanted to try a flexible resin to print an entire instrument. So I started with this one in the middle. This is the head joint for an Irish flute. And here on the side, you can see just right out of the printer is a Chinese style ocarina called a shun. And over here is a pan flute that I just printed out, and it came out really nicely. So one of the things that has been great about this novelty, where I just kind of wanted to experiment, see if it would work, I found out that these instruments, even though they're made out of a flexible material, the sound is quite similar to other instruments made out of harder materials like clay or wood. But even more importantly than that, through this experiment with the Irish flute specifically, it helped me to consider new ways to explore flute design that is really important for my research and my dissertation. I'll tell you about that in a second. Um, and here is just a slide that I wanted to fill with flutes iterations and experimentations. And that's another area of 3D printing that has been so important to my process in designing and exploring. And with Form 3, I've been able to integrate new materials and different processes of testing out different sounds. So for example, in this slide, you can just see all these tubes are different Irish flute pieces that I've been able to mix and match, you see, and stick together in different ways and make very slight changes in the embouchure here. Here you can see this embouchure has a different shape to it. It's a bit bigger, obviously a different material. That's a draft resin, and this is just the gray. And so I've just been experimenting, putting these flutes together in different combinations and testing out how easy they are to play and how they sound, of course, which is kind of the bottom line for me as a flute maker. I always want to make an instrument that first sounds good and is very playable. And after that, I like to explore possibilities in embossing and debossing and some surface design here that I'm also playing around with. So here it's all about the iterations and the trial and error, as anyone knows who works with projects where you need to make a prototype and revise and fix and explore. The 3D printing and with the Form 3 that fits on my desk, which is awesome. I don't need a huge workshop to explore and all the tools. It's a great way to develop my process and explore different sonic possibilities. So I said that I would get to the specifics of my research at Brown in the music department, specifically in two areas, which is access and accessibility. So these two slides, this one is about access and this one's about accessibility. And I'll tell you what I mean by that. So every time I go to a museum, I love museums, I find the areas where they have instruments on display. And I always find myself wondering what it would be like to hear the instrument, or even more compelling to me is what would it be like to play that instrument. So this is a proof of concept that I worked on with Roy Schildkraut at MIT, and he was very helpful in developing this project and process of scanning first the original instrument and then 3D printing it with Formlabs. He introduced me to the Formlabs technology, and I am forever grateful. And here our first goal, like I just mentioned, was to see if we could replicate the sound. So that was most important. So we scanned the original and then printed it, and I had to tweak some of the holes and change some of the internal contours to get it to sound like the original. And it does. So the idea here is to work with museums who have instruments in their collections to make replicas of some of their extremely unique ancient archaeological pieces and bring those sounds back to life so that people can access these instruments and access those sound worlds, which previously is not possible if the instrument is behind glass. So finally, I want to talk about accessibility. When I printed this Irish flute in the flexible 80A resin, like I said, it was kind of a novelty. It was something I was exploring to see if I could do it and what it would sound like. And in fact, it sounds great. And I realized I could sit on my couch and play this flute without having to stretch my arms the way I usually would with a rigid wooden flute like this one. I just realized it was more comfortable to play it in many ways. So this gave me the idea that using Formlabs resins and Fusion 360, I can explore different designs and ergonomics to make different instruments more accessible to people who might have disabilities, or like me, I've got a shoulder issue, not a disability, but from playing so much flute, and this happens to a lot of musicians, you could have back or neck problems, and sometimes you need the flute or the instrument to mold to your body instead of stretching your body in different ways to mold to the flute. So that's another area that the Formlabs workflow is allowing me to explore. And thank you very much for your time. I hope you enjoyed learning a little bit about how 3D printing can be used to make musical instruments. If you have any questions about any images, please get in contact with me. You can write to my email here, and also check out my blog where I'm constantly adding and changing pictures and comments and explorations about this process of 3D printing instruments. Have a great day.